Our world continues to change and push us in ways we have not been challenged before. On this show, we talk about these challenges, how to be aware of them, face them, and overcome them in your life. This is David Waldas, creator of the Aligned Living System.
And I'm Nick Musica, Aligned Living Coach. Welcome to the Aligned Living System podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Aligned Living System podcast. This is David here with Nick Musica again. And our topic today is about the threshold where everything changes for us. And so let me talk a little bit about what I mean by that. And so, when we think about doing our spiritual work, really the work that we do with Aligned Living, which is about our consciousness can be at a lot of different, we'll call them frequencies. There's lower frequencies where we're more in the density, where we're more in the struggle, we're more in the what's wrong, we're more in the uncomfortable emotions. And then there's higher frequencies where we tend to, it's like we move out of emotions. And when we hit this certain threshold with it, we just have this clarity, things feel less personal. We have a sense of next right action, what we want to do with our energy, what feels in resonance to us, what feels non-resonant to us. And that's kind of how we start to make decisions, is like, that feels like it's a match. It feels in resonance. That feels like it's not a match. It's not in resonance. And life becomes very simplified. And so, I wanted to break this down in a couple different ways. First off is the idea when we're talking about this from frequencies. As I said, there's lower, denser frequencies, and there's higher frequencies, and there's a threshold that we're going to hit where everything shifts. And so this is talking about things from a kind of a higher dimensional place. Or really we call it from an energetic place. And so let's compare that first to emotions. And so if we were thinking about this just in a very normal 3D way, we have positive emotions and we have negative emotions. And there's a threshold there too, right? Where we can feel ourselves, where when we have a negative emotions, it tends to pull us down. And the more that we ruminate about that, the more that we talk about it or get stuck in it, the more it holds us down there. And when we're there, things feel heavy. We don't feel a lot of energy. We don't feel the forward movement. Maybe we get energy from anger, but we don't feel this, uplifting, positive peace. And then there's a threshold with our emotions where they start to become more positive. And when that happens, we have more energy, we have more direction, we have more desire, we have, all these things about moving forward. And here's the thing, like when they're guided by emotions, quite often we create things that we don't want. Quite often we, dive into stuff because it feels good now, or it supports our ego in some way. And so that area is always very much a roller coaster, right? It's like, oh, I'm having these good emotions. I'm having a great day. I feel, full of myself, or I feel full of energy. And so I do all these things, and then maybe they crash and I end up down in these lower frequencies. And so if we're going to use that as a comparison, because we all know that, the same is true when we're looking at energetics. And so a lot of the Aligned Living work is about recognizing that we have this control panel that, we've known as our imagination, but when we move into the energetic realm, that's how we control what's happening inside of ourselves. And so there's basically this ability to move up and down inside of where we hold our awareness, where we engage with ourselves from this energetic perspective. And we actually have a lot more control over it than we realize. With emotions, we usually have very little control, right? Because they're often driven by circumstances. And we can reframe and all of that, but still it's workarounds. It's like, like doing mental gymnastics to get there. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about that threshold, what it looks like, what it feels like, and really kind of how to, kind of the basics of what we're doing when we're taking control. So welcome, Nick.
Howdy, David. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yeah, super cool topic. I was pondering how this type of topic is typically talked about in 3D land business world, and a lot of it is EQ related.
Yeah.
All right. So it's your self-awareness, your awareness with others, and various factors around that. Where that emotion comes in instead of reacting to things, which typically doesn't get the result you're looking for, and also you don't have a result you're looking for in those instances.
Right.
It tends to create messy things. We can easily equate it to someone cut me off, right? Driving.
Reactive.
and you're just mad and you're flipping the bird or you're riding their bumper, like whatever that reaction is, it's
Brake
not
checking them.
healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And that could lead into an accident, or it can lead to hitting something, right? It could lead
Yeah.
to damage
Or
for
road
yourself.
rage. Yeah.
Something non-productive. Because there's no goal there. There's no outcome to it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just emotive. Like my goal is to emote, right? My
That's
goal
it.
is to let these emotions that are in me out because they don't feel comfortable in here. So I got to let them out there.
Right. Which is very dangerous in this scenario if you're behind the wheel of a vehicle, right?
Yeah. 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 Or
Or
in a
if you're,
relationship or,
yes, right. If you do
trying to be
that,
effective in some way.
totally, right. To your boss, to your subordinates, to your spouse, to your
Yeah.
mate, whatever it may
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
No bueno.
Yeah, yeah. And so we all know that world, right? Like we know how much it can control it can have over us, and then we try to settle ourselves down, but it's often like workarounds, And
Mm,
so what we do with Aligned Living is we create more space internally so that it doesn't feel so impulsive like it and when we play with our frequency so that we're actually operating in a place where we're above that threshold I was just talking about, things don't feel so personal. They can't get a hold of us and hook us in the same way and pull us along.
yeah.
And when they do, we often notice it because there's such a drastic internal shift for us from feeling, a sense of peace, a sense of alignment, a sense of being, in resonance with self to very much there's something wrong. I'm really uncomfortable right now. And so, it's very easy for us to jump from that world of frequencies to the world of emotion, particularly when we first start this practice. And so really what we're talking about today, then what I wanted to hone in on a little bit is what that threshold is and what it's about. And, so often it's actually created by our past. And so, we all have these things that were handed to us, in this lifetime that are going to be what created our coping mechanisms, what created our traumas and our response to those traumas. And it's going to be the things that, we've decided, the stories we told ourselves. And, all of them have some level of truth to them and all of them have some level of non-truth to them. It's just the nature of how it works. And a lot of those happen very young in our lives where we didn't maybe have the same wherewithal to sort through them or the same ability. Or they were just so overwhelming that they just left this imprint on us that still affects us today.
Yeah.
And so, really interesting thing about that is that there's a frequency point that we are resonating with, that when we get above it, we end up above where those traumas sit. I'll just call them traumas for, even though it's kind of all encompassing. And
Yeah.
so the analogy I often use for this is, it's like, I call it the shit creek analogy. And it's the idea that, we're all kind of in this creek that is us and it is our consciousness. And we all have these turds in our creek. And those turds are the coping mechanisms, the traumas, the stories that hold us back, the self-judgments, the low self-esteem around certain things, the high self-esteem around certain things. And when we're downstream from them, we're constantly contaminated by the influence of those things, of those past experiences. And they limit how we can think. They drive reactions, they drive stories that we tell ourselves and we get stuck in. And that makes it really hard to move past them because those become our limiters, those become our upper limits. And when we are trying to get past them, but we're still in it, it gets really uncomfortable. We freak out because it feels really unsafe. And so we tend to kind of keep ourselves downstream from the turds, because when we push up into them, like we get really freaked out and, as I said, unsafe. And so the aligned living work is actually about taking our consciousness intentionally, moving it up past that threshold above the line where the turds are in our own creek. And when we do that, I think that skeptics could go, oh, that's spiritual bypassing, right? Like you're just trying to not have to deal with your shit, like literally. And so here's the difference is that when we do this, we don't just go upstream and go, nice, pure water now. I don't have to deal with this. Like that, all that shit still exists. And so, but when we look at it now from upstream, rather than downstream with it just running over us, saturating us, we're able to have a more accurate, cleaner perspective. We're able to look at it in a way where we can let go of those old traumas, where they don't have the same influence and impact, we're able to engage with them in a way that allows them to start to fall apart. And from that place of higher perspective, we don't get stuck in the story anymore. And we're able to dismantle these. And it's so cool. Like to see it happen in client after client, where the things that just kept them absolutely stuck are something that they start to feel empowered by because they overcame it. And rather than debilitated by it because it was overcoming them.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is always about that threshold. It's always about, am I operating above it? Because I don't stand a chance if I'm downstream from it. Like I'm always just constantly contaminated by, the turds are just leaching into the creek and I'm swimming in it. And that's my reality. And so when we look and feel our limitations, that's it. And so, I mean, it's such a, when I got the download for Aligned Living, I didn't really think that much about, what is this really creating? It was just like, oh, here's this system where I feel different. I feel free. I feel expanded. I feel spacious internally. I feel less limited. I feel much more in touch with what's next right action. I feel much less in touch with how, a victimhood or like things are personal if they're not going my way. But then as we break it down and see, this particular piece, I think is so huge for people because I think it's so relatable. How often do we feel like we can't move ahead? And when we do, it just gets so uncomfortable, so scary because we're pushing through these traumas. And when we're trying to push through those traumas, man, like we upper limit really, really fast.
Yeah. So I think it's important to identify trauma because a lot of people, I don't think, associate themselves with it, right? Because you see
Yeah, it's a
people
great
from the
point.
military, you see
Yeah,
people who have had it really bad,
yeah,
and that's what trauma looks like for folks.
yeah,
Where
yeah,
that's true, but that's not the all-encompassing definition of it. So it could just be an event when you're younger that made an impression on you.
yeah. And then I would say the younger that it happens,
Yeah,
the more impactful it is. And it could be something very simple. It could be, a teacher that called you an idiot, or a teacher that said, you're such an airhead, you never know what's going on. Right.
yeah,
And, and you're in second grade and you hear that, like it becomes imprinted.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
these don't have to be major events. It doesn't have to be an accident or witnessing something. It doesn't have to be,
totally.
something that you would feel would warrant being called a trauma. And it's absolutely just something that left an imprint because that imprint is still affecting us today.
Yeah, yeah. And you don't even have to be the recipient of it. You could
Yeah,
just be
absolutely.
the one who observes it.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and yeah, and to your point of it not being a big deal, that I had a somatic therapy session a few months ago when
Hmm.
something showed up for me looking to get rid of it. And I'm on the line with the therapist and she saw the look in my face and she's like, "What's that?" And I'm like, sort of shaking it off. And she's like, "It doesn't have to be big."
Yeah,
And I was like,
yeah,
"Oh,
yeah.
okay." And then once she said that, I started to feel where it was, started to move
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't, you don't have to go. It's not the size of being in the military and seeing a buddy's, arm fly across your face. I mean, that
Yeah,
is
yeah,
horrific, and it
yeah.
doesn't have to be that to have an impression on you.
Yeah, yeah. And interestingly, once we start to learn how to live above the threshold, we can have experiences that normally would imprint a massive trauma that don't because we're able to process them in real time and they don't get stuck. We're able to stay in the higher perspective that releases it so it never imprints. And I know I had that experience. I've talked a little bit about it. Like I don't like to go into the details of it because it's triggering for people, but I witnessed a suicide a year and a half ago.
Yeah,
And, it took me like a day and a half of just really sitting with it. And now as I talk about it, like I can feel like a little bit in me, but it's like, um, it is what it is. Like it happened in front of me, like there it was. And at the time, like I had like because it was right outside of my hotel room, I was able to just kind of sit with it and stay with it and really have the full experience. It wasn't a flash in front of me. And I intentionally did that because I could feel the trauma trying to build. I could feel myself, like it was just so overwhelming of an experience that to sit with it and just give myself like a couple days to keep processing it, not try to bury it, not try to go anywhere else, but to hold myself in as a higher consciousness as I could and stay present with what I had just experienced. And now when I think about it, like I don't have an imprint in my body.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
does that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, and I'm reflecting on like my time in the therapist chair, my time with energetics.
Mhm.
And like the time in the therapist chair helps you identify and name things. So you can
Yeah,
see
yeah,
it
yeah,
as it happens, and you can get
yeah.
to give it a name and start to
Mhm.
you can do your own research on it. Um, but at least for me, and I think this is true for a lot of folks, is you can't talk it out so that it doesn't exist. That just I don't, at least again, just from my perspective, that doesn't happen. Not for
Mhm,
me.
mhm, mhm.
You have to find a different way to get rid of it once you have identified it and talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's for me, the aligned living work and the energetics and working through meditations and all that fun stuff has been huge in terms of being able to sit with it from the place you're talking about, and then um, being okay with it leaving, really
Yeah,
inviting
yeah.
it to leave and not holding on to it anymore.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I just had a client that was sharing publicly about the work we did together, or do together. And he
Mm,
was talking about his therapist that he absolutely loves, that he's been with for 28 years, and how impactful that's been. And once we started working together, he actually said, well, like I'm releasing more stuff. Like I don't, the therapy, as much as I valued it, like it's not what matches me now. And he's not working with his therapist anymore because he realized that it was the energy that needed to move with it. And when we go through stuff and move the energy at the same time, it's a totally different experience. And where therapy absolutely has its place, and there's a lot of people that need the talk therapy, and
sure, sure.
um, but when we're really ready to move it, when we can do the energetics with it and unhook from it,
Yeah.
it's one thing to understand a trauma deeply,
Yes.
and to be able to go like, well, this is a trigger point for me, so I need to communicate about it. I need to be aware of it, like, but what if we actually can release the energetic structure of it so that it's not a trauma for you anymore?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit like studying a topic and reading all about it and having all this knowledge of it, aka talk therapy.
Yeah, yeah.
But you can't until you go build a building. Like
Hmm,
you don't
hmm.
really know how the hammer feels in your hands, the nails, how they react when they bend, and right. Like it's a very different experience, the practical versus the theoretical.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the theoretical is more akin to the talk therapy, and the practical is akin to moving whatever is stuck out of our system.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's funny that client texted me while you were talking about it too, just as,
Funny.
and so it's funny, like this quantum entanglement piece too, right? Where we're,
Mm,
this energy moving, like there's these connections, and I think as just becomes more and more the norm, like I think talk therapy is going to evolve. It's going to have to, because it
has
can't
to.
just be talk therapy, and we're
No.
seeing more and more somatic therapy, which is great because that's moving the energy as well.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
can also do it by going like, yeah, I see this from a higher perspective now, and I have a different story around it. Now I can allow that energetic structure, because that's really what it is. Inside of our system, traumas create an energetic structure, and they
Yeah.
create a story, and it's like a program. And when it gets triggered, it's like press play on tape, and we go into that whole story and it plays out. And
Yeah.
so, from the energetic perspective and from that higher perspective, we can dismantle it, pull that programming out of our field, and all of a sudden now we're engaging differently.
Yeah.
And it really is that simple. And it requires the intentionality, it requires the, doing the work. Um, but
Yeah.
finding ways to cope with trauma is very old now and outdated, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you brought up a huge aspect of things which a lot of people some people dive into it and other people sort of, poo-poo the thing that they were doing, be it aligned living
Hmm,
as one of the things we're talking about, being
hmm,
somatic therapy, being it therapy, being plant medicine is
hmm,
another one of these
hmm,
things where I
hmm,
did the thing once
hmm.
and then I'm expecting everything to change.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What it opens
Yeah,
the
I
door to
tried
the
that. Not, yeah, yeah.
right. It got you on the path. Now it's
Yeah,
your job
yeah,
to stay on the path.
yeah, yeah. And that's why I was joking, like why did we call it aligned living? Because like we've all had aligned moments, like, and those are great, but it doesn't really change shit until you really start to live from that
Yeah,
place. And
right.
then all of a sudden now you're actually stabilizing your energy. What's in resonance with you becomes so much more clear. What's not becomes so much more clear. And that's
Yeah,
not just around us, it's also inside of us. And so then
yeah,
we start to shed the things that are not us, all those layers that we've accumulated living on this planet that are definitely not us. We shed them, and
hmm
shit changes quickly.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Which is the fundamental of aligned living. It starts with you. It doesn't start out there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that we reverse the feedback loop. Instead of asking the world
Mhm.
who we are and having it come at us, we start with us, get in touch with who we are, and we bring that to the world and let the world respond. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, good stuff. Good stuff.
Yep, really good
So
stuff.
yeah, so lots of opportunities if you're interested, like going to the webpage, there's several free offerings. There's a pop-up when you enter the page, it says, would you like to take the free Aligned Living video course? And so free resources. And, if you want to dive in, new clients, we have a special for a one-time session for new clients.
Mhm.
And then that way you can get a bigger taste before you jumped into, either the group program or one-to-one if you're feeling even more committed.
Nice.
But
Yeah, super cool to get that exposure and experience and decide for yourself, is this the right thing for me right now?
yeah,
Give it a
yeah,
shot.
yeah, yeah. And it's cool now that, gosh, it's been what, since 8 years that this has been going, not eight, at least 8 years. And so, there's just so much evidence of how much it changes things. And it's cool to watch traction. Like, it's funny how, as much as I've been around for 8 years, like in the last bit, there's just been so much more traction of people talking about it and doing it. And I think
Mm.
part of that is really timely. Like, there's something happening energetically on the planet where so many
Mhm.
of us are feeling like, okay, it's time. Like
Mhm.
I got to move forward. I can't stay stuck in my old shit anymore. I
Mm-mm.
can't do things how I used to do them. And so it's really, I've often felt like this work was kind of ahead of its time. And it's really cool because I think that it's not anymore. And I think that there's been kind of 8 years of preparation for now, and now is now. And
Mhm.
so it's crazy how it's just been taking off all of a sudden, which is super exciting and fantastic for multiple reasons. But yeah, it's just seeing more and more people step into that transformation because it's time.
Yeah, super cool. Nice.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for listening. And as always, open to listener questions, feedback, responses. Makes it so much more interesting when you all are involved. Check out the webpage and have a great week.
Thanks, folks.
See y'all next week. We hope you enjoyed listening to today's podcast. And if you did, please subscribe so you can catch the next episode. If you want to learn more about the Aligned Living System and how it could support you in your life, check out davidwaldas.com.